money like a cashier. Customer clientele. I was broke, that was last year. Getting money like a cashier. Get the money like a cashier. Benjamin, nothing less. I was broke, that was last year. Don't change 'em. I never switched up. Been down since day one. Stay social. People change them. I never switched up. Social currency.
So welcome to another episode of Dope Black Thoughts, everybody. My name's Kevin.
And I'm Marcus Ivy. And once again, we have our special guest, the Paperboy.
Paperboy Esquire.
By the way, is the Paperboy joining the DVT family?
I mean, could it be? We're in negotiations.
Okay, fair enough. Fair enough.
Negotiations.
Right.
Michael, have your people call my people. I got offers out there. This guy.
And we also have special guest today. We have Chuck Linsmeier as well. Thank you for joining us, Chuck.
You bet. Thank you.
Chuck. And Carter, do you want to introduce your guests?
All right. This is Charles Linsmeier, no Esquire. I've known Mr. Linsmeier, and I was thinking about this for almost a quarter of a freaking century. Since 1998, Mr. Linsmeier and I went to the University of New Mexico together, and that's where we kind of started our journey. But one of the reasons that I wanted him to talk to you guys, Chuck is one of the senior editors at one of the largest publishers in the country, and I'll let Chuck introduce himself.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me on the show. I watched a number of episodes and excited about having the conversation with you guys today. I do want to add, Carter and I started text messaging about joining the show about a week ago, and thinking about coming on and been excited about the opportunity since then. And then Tuesday rolled into Wednesday. And the news changed, and the Attorney General in Kentucky announced that they weren't going to file any charges of substance in the killing of Breonna Taylor. And considering the gravity of that scenario, the fact that you're having me on the show just means that much more to me. But I do want to just acknowledge the sincere pain that people are going through right now. I have a colleague of mine who wrote me a email this week, just really expressing, a Black colleague of mine, really expressing her anguish over the decision, and sharing a lot about her having grown up in Louisville, having family in Louisville, unbeknownst to us, traveling back to Kentucky to help bring attention to Breonna's case well before people like me even knew who she was, and how much we don't always recognize what's happening in our colleagues' lives behind the scenes. So she's very much in my thoughts today as I'm talking to you guys, and I appreciate the opportunity and hope I live up to that opportunity.
Absolutely.
Yeah, thank you for that.
Thank you for that. Yeah, this has been one of those situations where I don't,
Well, just to give, I'm not here to give Chuck's bona fides, but one of me and Chuck, we've been close. We are close. I gave one of the greatest speeches ever at his wedding. You're welcome. But one of the reasons we were so close, one of the reasons we are so close is, I believe when we talked to the Black publisher from Taylor, we talked about New Mexico just being this weird oasis, literally in the middle of the high desert. And Chuck and I became fast friends and close friends, one, because we played rugby together, and two, because we took a lot of African-American studies classes together, Black books, specifically Black Books 1 and Black Books 2. And his perspective in those classes were unmatched. We get kind of caught up in, all of us being the same. If you're one Black person, just the same as another Black person, and sometimes you got to have an individual with perspective who can speak to, like, wait a minute, maybe we want to look at it from a different perspective, and even if that's coming in from inside the culture, it was welcome, and that's what we had. That's what we had in Black Books. I mean, one of my favorite teacher. There are only two.
I got two as well.
Dr. O'Connor is one of the greatest professors I've ever had. And I dare say he wasn't in class 75. No, let's give him 30% of the time. I mean, speak to that, speak to that experience. And one other thing, he's from Racine. He's from Racine, Wisconsin, which I believe you had a term for.
What's that?
What was the term for Racine, Wisconsin?
I'm not going there.
Explain the demographics of Racine.
I'll explain. One clarification: Carter was the best man at my wedding. He did earn that honor through a raffle, and
That's about right.
a subsequent gin drinking contest. So it worked out well. But and he did deliver one of the greatest best man speeches of all time. Yes, I'll give a quick introduction. So I work for Macmillan Learning, which is an educational publisher and digital learning company. And I'll explain a little bit, maybe over the course of this, why those two things are a little different but related. I'm the Senior Vice President of the Humanities and Social Sciences program in higher ed. So I focus on courses from English composition, communication, public speaking, history, to psychology and economics. And as well, the head of the editorial team for our AP publishing program. We have a kind of a unique editorial program just focused on AP education. I did grow up in Racine, Wisconsin. Racine, Wisconsin is a industrial city in the Midwest. If I had to pick a movie that was close enough to it, it would be Tommy Boy.
What?
There's a couple of factories there that, S.E. Johnson is based there, Japanese tractors. And it's really been the heart of that type of industrial Midwest, right? And so those cities have gone through a lot of change over the years. And Racine sits just about 15, 20 miles south of Milwaukee, obviously a big and important part of the industrial Midwest, and about 10 miles north of Kenosha, Wisconsin, which also has been in the news for all the wrong reasons. So that's where I grew up and lived until I was 18. And then moved to Albuquerque to attend University of New Mexico, met our good friend Carter, where we played rugby together and have had, 20 years of debates on who was slightly better than the other person. I might challenge you to a race still. So.
Well, he won the award for the most humble.
Yeah.
Right. Most humility in one man.
And so Carter and I, pursued our education at New Mexico, and then obviously we're friends both in scholarship and in rugby. Carter had introduced me to the Black Books courses he referred to with Dr. Linsmeier, who is really kind of a legend in terms of our academic lives, in terms of how he inspired us and helped really facilitate people to think differently. It was a professor that really wanted the conversation to go and advance as much as possible before he threw the flag and said it was time to slow down a little. So he really let us go deep in that course, and I think it was a profound memory for a lot of people in that course. After that, I joined Macmillan, and through a set of various jobs, ended up in New York as an editor on our psychology list, and then became publisher of economics, and now in my current role as editorial director. So it's an enormous responsibility when you think about the number of students that are using the educational products that we produce, and one we take very seriously. I'm supported by the fact that I have an amazing group of editors that are highly committed to what they do and are very much interested in where they can take education going forward.
Well, you're bearing the lead. When you were back in Albuquerque, I think I'm not sure when you started working at Macmillan, but your territory was those small schools in like Southern Colorado. I want to say Adams State was one of them. But
yeah, I started in sales as a sales rep. So that's a publisher's rep. You go around and you talk to various faculty about the different choices of textbooks that are out there. So at that time it was very much a print textbook-centered way of education, which has changed quite dramatically in the 20 years I've been in the business. And, you would talk to a faculty member and find out what their motivations were. Do they want to teach, psychology from a cultural psychology standpoint or neuroscience standpoint? Is there a flavor of textbook that's going to better fit the approach that they want to bring into the classroom? Is there a pedagogical approach that elevates learning in a different way? And it was fun because your job is to help match them with the right thing that's going to make their class better. And then took that then, and so I worked Southern Colorado. I did that little belt around from kind of Trinidad over to Durango, so Fort Lewis, Adams State. At one point I was going up to CSU Pueblo, but I was going all the way down to El Paso and all of the New Mexico schools. So, and that was back when I didn't have a cell phone. So that was me driving around a lot.
I think we thought he was the coolest one because he was the first one to get a job, I think.
Out of college.
Okay. And he had a job with a car.
Yeah.
Oh, you got a car? They gave you a company car.
Yeah, it was, I did do this whole territory. So yeah, it was kind of like a high school movie where, I gained friends because I had a decent car. So.
Oh.
But Chuck made it good. They gave him a car.
But, you're right up our alley talking about you're selling textbooks though. And kind of talk about textbooks, especially two school board members over here, two Black school board members. Talk about textbooks because we've given some criticism and also gotten some pushback about, how much African history is in the curriculum. How much does Black history start in America with the slavery experience, with chattel slavery or triangular trade or what have you, versus the reality of Black history just being history and going back as far as men.
Yeah, so why don't I talk a little bit about a little view of how I think about textbooks and where we run into those problems, right? And then kind of the way I'm seeing the industry thinking about some of those. So, as I said, we tend to think of all of the different textbooks and all the digital programs we create as having some meaningful differences from the other, right? Otherwise, why would we create another product? So we're trying to match things to different people. And I kind of go back to, I like simple kind of rubrics to help my mind work. And if you think of like the who, what, when, where, why, and how, questions of inquiry. When I think of a textbook and publishing, I very much think of who. So who's writing, the audience is at the end of the day, always the students and instructors, but in terms of what we're putting into the market, who, the author's vision that we're trying to help them achieve. Our job as editors is to be stewards of that vision and help them accomplish it, give them feedback on what's going to meet the market. And that's the what, so what's actually going to be in the book. It's a series of choices that we're making. So textbooks aren't introducing new facts. They're synthesizing a wealth of information into something that's coherent for students in a 4-month, course typically. And those choices, right? That's the whole game that you're talking about. Is what are the choices on that what, and then that's buoyed by the why, right? So if we understand the why, then I understand why this neuroscience approach to introductory psychology doesn't emphasize things in the same way that a cultural focus on psychology might emphasize it. So to a degree, the books will have different flavors that way. And then on the, when, where, and how, to me, that's digital learning, that's pedagogy, that's in class, that's the, should it happen before class? Should it happen in class as an active learning? Should it happen later in class? How do we think of the arc of a learning experience for a student? The where, should it happen on a mobile device? Should it be on their screen? Should it actually be in a print book? And then the how, is the best way to communicate this really a 10,000 word chapter, or is the best way to communicate this an 8-minute video activity that really asks them to think reflectively on the topic? So those are the pedagogy and the publishing interact into what we're doing. So where I see the problem, and it's in some ways you don't see it, and then once you start seeing it, it's everywhere. Is I started with the who, and then I went to the what, and then I went to the why. Because historically, when I was publishing, as an editor and signing authors, we would receive proposals, and we'd evaluate them. This is a good proposal. This isn't. This fits us. This is too much like
You said proposals from like authors who write?
Yeah, so from faculty. So all of the books we publish are going to be from active faculty in their discipline. So,
Okay.
so we're going to have a professor at, University of Kentucky sends us a proposal. We're going to take a look at it. Professor at UAB sends us a proposal. We're going to take a look. And we select very few titles because you're only going to publish so many titles. And we like the vision. So that we understand the why, and then we help them with the what. And we're really going to move through that. What we've lacked, because also the associations in which we work, the American Psychological Association, the American Economic Association, many of them very liberal-minded with very poor diversity in terms of race. So we're typically getting proposals from white professors. And that always is going to affect the lens in which you create and the choices you make. And so to a degree, we needed to look at the why first. What do we need? Then determine what the what, and then go find the who that actually can illustrate this. So if we need to look at this from a market that has a lack of diversity in thinking around racial lines, where that may be very important in U.S. history or in sociology, and understanding that, making sure we're conscious about what are the needs of that market that aren't being met, and that's not intended to be overly critical of our editorial teams. I think they've done an exceptional job in most cases. More on my own of thinking of how have I changed a little in terms of thinking about what our role is as an evaluator of proposals that come in versus really trying to help shape the options that are available. So there's been parts of our company, our industry, that have been way ahead of that in the first place, other parts that have been behind, and you see it in kind of like you said, the books you're critical of and the ones that you feel like are already in a good place.
What kind of market forces, or if you can speak to the market forces that may impact what you put in a book? Is there, I know you're who, what, why, when, how, but from that top level, like you've got to sell a book to Liberty, or give me a conservative school in the South.
Yeah.
Right.
Yes.
You've got to sell a book to the Liberty, but you also got to sell a book to, University of Colorado, or even better, Berkeley.
Oh, yes.
Like, are there top-down market forces? Like, okay, we can't put, but you can only make that one book, but we got to sell this textbook, to the whole country. How does that work?
So the best way we handle that is not to publish one author, but to bring multiple in. So economics is a pretty good example on this one. Economics, you have, I'm kind of thinking of two different threads, but you have a more libertarian view of economics, more conservative, but definitely more libertarian, free market, limited government intervention. Economics is kind of, on some of these levels, you're thinking about, especially in macroeconomy and so forth, libertarian to more active government, so a more fiscally forward Keynesian approach. So you don't just put a book in the middle and hope that all of them are going to coalesce to the middle. What we do is we publish for multiple voices. And so that's important to me too. We are, we support free speech, and we want to have multiple voices out there for people to consider. So when I was publisher of economics, I had inherited a list that was already in place, but it was in great shape, and we continued to add to it. But we published Paul Krugman, Nobel laureate, New York Times columnist, fierce liberal in the public intellectual. And we also publish Tyler Cowen and Alex Tabarrok, who are traditionally more libertarian, highly credible economists who are who really shift policy as well. And so both of those threads should be in the market, in my view. Like that, my job is to bring those in, and if they're viable, then they get picked up in those various places.
Did you ever go as far left as like Richard Wolff?
I don't know Richard Wolff.
He's a Marxian economist.
Okay. So we have a sister publisher, Red Globe Press, based out of London, has been part of Macmillan overall, and they published a book on modern monetary theory. So this is a new approach. It's kind of the underpinnings of the Green New Deal. Very much, Stephanie Kelton is not the author in the book, but she's been kind of the vocal leader of it within economics. She was an advisor to Senator Sanders' campaign. And so it fits into that segment. Currently in our primary market being US, in my experience in economics, wouldn't see a principles of economics market opportunity for something that was strictly Marxist.
And if you want to check him out, I think he taught at Brown and New School as well. And he does a podcast called I'm gonna get you the name of that podcast. I'm gonna look him up right now.
But what I'll amend that with is, if one of my editors came to me and said they did, we're going to investigate that and listen, right? That, I don't have a top-down approach to the editorial teams. I want editors and authors to build the case for the titles that they think should be in the market. And we do extensive market research. Every book that it usually takes multiple years for a book to come to fruition. We're going to go through dozens and dozens of reviews, focus groups. We're interacting with instructors and students all along the way. So hopefully we would know before we publish if there's a viable market for it.
So that's why it kind of leads me to some questions with respect to basically vetting the research and so forth, making sure that you're putting in credible facts, I suppose. So what is your opinion with respect to the 1619 project out of New York, essentially?
Mm-hmm.
I think that was that the New York Times is one of them, or one of the groups. And then you have this commission by 45, the 1776 commission and whatnot. Have you all been approached with those type of, those two scenarios, if you will?
Yeah, so I think I would defer to our history publisher and history editor who would be able to speak better. So I'll speak anyway and embarrass them. No, I think the 69 project was received very well. A lot of it wouldn't be a primary tool in the classroom. My understanding is that it's typically used in terms of a complement to other traditional texts, which is common in history. We have a whole series on the Bedford St. Martin's series on history and culture, which are short monograph titles and really are used to supplement that core type of text that you would have. The response from the Trump administration, I've only read up a little, but they actually, in one of the articles, I think, promoted an actual textbook from a small conservative press. And my answer would be, if you're conservative and in favor of the free market, see if that book can sell.
In that book I was referring to, is Democracy at Work, A Cure for Capitalism.
Yeah.
That's what I was thinking about.
Oh, yeah, okay.
So one more question. So how many Black authors do you think you have, percentage-wise, that you all have published?
A small amount. So, I think of that for the reasons I explained to a degree in terms of how how previously we were really receiving manuscripts in a traditional publisher. Second is, a lot of what we do is about digital learning experiences that are broader. But where we have Black authors, you tend to see it in two concentrations, neither of which will be particularly satisfying to hear. One is when we're talking about African American history, right? So that's where you, and then not always, right? And second has been a more concerted effort is around like when we bring on a new co-author onto a title, we're thinking about diversifying our voices on that title. And then when we bring out new titles as a first edition, it's slow because most of the titles that we have in place are revisions after revisions that we've been working on. And in many ways, that's where we have to win in terms of thinking about diversity. because there's a huge catalog that we can improve upon while we're also diversifying our author base. So, but I think it's important.
Could you dumb that down a little bit for me? So when you say you have opportunities in the revision, do you mean like you can add more diverse authors into textbooks in the revision so you don't have to rewrite the whole thing?
Yeah, so we typically are like revising books maybe 3 to 4 years. And the author teams are usually pretty stable, but as people go through their career, they decide they don't want to continue on the next edition, or we decide we need to bring on a new voice onto the book. That's always an opportunity to think about diversifying the team. But really it's about, not really what it's about, but I think in the short term, we need to improve upon the books that exist in terms of the content. And so then it becomes not just about finding diverse authors, but it's really about finding what we've been working on as inclusive reviewing practices. You know, having people that represent the students who are going to be using your book review the title to make sure that, you know, we're sensitive to it. So we have an incredibly committed group of editors that are focused on diversity, equity, inclusion, and every one of them and us has our own implicit biases, and we're going to have blind spots. So we need to have a more, you know, continue to have a more diverse reviewing group. There's kind of three lines to that. One is improving the reviewer base. Second is structure. So good intention without structure is really hard to see executed over time. So thinking about the teams now have a D&I checklist that they're starting to work through on every title as a way to just find your blind spots. You know, make sure you're thinking about content that might need a different set of eyes on it across all kinds of different threads. I mean, one of the groups that's really least represented in textbooks right now are people who are differently abled, who you don't see, and there's that risk always of defining somebody simply by their disability, and how we make sure that we handle that in a culturally responsive sort of way. So there's a lot that we have to look at, and having tools is essential to our team. And then the third one is, language matters. So we have a team that's been working very closely in the recent weeks on a style guide around diversity and inclusion that will be used as a tool for editors and in our conversations with our authors to think about how we approach things. So you see it in the press from AP, Associated Press, announcing that they will capitalize Black in all of their publications, as well as Indigenous, Hispanic, and but will not capitalize the term white and explain their reasons for that. So everyone's looking at how they're going to approach this and think about it as something that will certainly evolve over time. But there's a lot in that language, I think, that also comes back to the idea of people being able to see themselves in the books that they use, and how much that can be a factor in the student's motivation.
When you were primarily, when you first started, were selling out west, so you didn't have a lot of, there are no HBCUs out here, but as you moved up, did you start working with any HBCUs?
Yeah, we've done, I'm not on the human resources side. We've also been looking at just our workforce and how to continue to look at ways to diversify the workforce. And there's been some work with HBCUs. I think the intent's been really good on that side. I think our results need to improve in terms of continuing to, I know that our results need to improve in terms of continuing to diversify our team. But we also work with them in scholarship. So there's a large NSF, National Science Foundation grant to the HBCUs around motivation and persistence of, I think it's focused on Black men, but it might be both Black men and women in STEM courses. And we're looking at ways that we can partner with them, because we're in STEM courses all over the country. And what you need in terms of that type of study is thinking about, how data differs in different environments. So we're looking for ways that we can partner with the HBCUs on some of that work. And that's been an active conversation.
And then you were speaking to the, how books get made is the who, and getting proposals from professors. Wouldn't that be fertile breeding ground for a literally just it coming out of these institutions would be inclusive and diverse.
Definitely, and should be more than historically it has been. One of the challenges we always face is that writing educational content, whether it's a textbook or increasingly for us, what is important is thinking about that end-to-end experience for a student in a classroom. That pre-class video that they view that's 8 minutes long, that's supposed to spur curiosity and drive motivation. And if it's so culturally, like opaque to you in terms of your life, you're not going to be motivated by it. So, there's so many pieces of that puzzle that are going to be important for us. But one of the challenges is that educational content and textbooks historically are not particularly valued in, say, a tenure track review. They want new research and new publication. Okay. So because we're synthesizing information that's already available, we're trying to bring something that's that hasn't been as much part. So then you imagine that I spend too much time on Twitter, and when looking at
not hard.
Yeah, like when looking at Black colleagues in academia, there's a lot to go through. So if you're working your way through, whether at a HBCU or not, there's still implicit and sometimes explicit barriers that are being presented. And if you're trying to advance your career to get to tenure, you're trying to establish yourself in the research world, calling me up and saying, hey, let's write a textbook probably isn't the first. So, and that goes back to that, who, what, why? Like, how do we think about the who that we need to, those people that we need to get to sooner in their careers as well. And our English team does a really great job. They have a program called Bedford New Scholars, and they really connect with grad students coming out of major programs, across the spectrum of schools, and really, developing that relationship early in their career so that there's that potential as they go through of how can I influence education while I'm advancing my career.
Yeah, I've actually been looking at the history of Macmillan, so I was really kind of taken aback. Obviously started in England and.
Are they German? Are they German now?
Well, no, it's American owned.
We're currently we've been for my entire career family owned, privately held by used to be a brother and sister in Germany, and now passed and her daughter, so his niece has taken over. And we've worked with them, but they've always had Stefan in particular, Stefan von Holtzbrink, who's been the owner of the company pretty much the entire time that I've been here. Has always taken let the companies develop the identity themselves. So Macmillan used to be a various sets of imprints that have developed into Macmillan, and each has kind of really coalesced into a new culture for Macmillan.
Yeah, just the number of companies.
Redford, Freebird, and Worth. Is that still a thing?
That was when I got hired. We were Barnes, W.H. Freeman, and Worth publishers, and there's a history in publishing of having imprints below the overall imprint, and that's pretty common. So that was reflective of that at the time.
We're back. Question. I was thinking about this. I think Mr. Cox also grew up in Texas. I think in the state of Texas, 7th grade, everybody has to take Texas history, which I just assumed as a child, everyone would take Texas history in the whole United States.
I was literally thinking about Texas textbooks before the break.
So the next thing is, so Texas history, and this is I wish I could go back in time and bring forward a 7th grade Texas history textbook and just read it and show how much is not included in that textbook. We were talking about that whole market forces. So obviously the state of Texas has a Board of Education that is renowned.
Confederacy too, right?
It is renowned.
Yes.
It's world renowned.
When you're dealing with those forces, when you're dealing with, you know, hey, we see you got that one textbook, you know, I guess University of Texas, Texas A&M, two of the biggest in the country, I believe. Are you getting any pushback, or did you ever get any pushback when you're like, well, no, we have a set of facts that we are going to put in a textbook? Do you ever get any kind of, well, then we'll just go somewhere else where they'll give us their own facts?
They're alternative facts even.
Yeah.
I am.
Don't get fired.
Yeah, definitely.
I feel like, you know, someone at Macmillan is also making that gesture and saying those words. So, no, I'm on safe ground here. Like, here's the thing for Macmillan. We publish for high school and K through 12. We really only publish for the AP course. There's really large publishers that publish for K through 12 that dominate that market. And we've never thought that we could compete in a K through 12 type of program. So we decided about 15 years ago to really focus on higher ed and then to extend into AP. AP to us feels like a strong bond between AP and higher ed, and the work of the College Board to really expand AP to all students and allow for a lot more kind of inclusive enrollment into the AP programs has been both a benefit for us in that more students are in the AP program, but also we're able to reach more students. And so for us, we're meeting a set of national standards that the College Board sets. Okay. And they set a set of standards for every AP course. So rarely are we in a position where we have to align them to all the different state standards. And I don't have an editorial team big enough at that stage to really be able to manage that. So only rarely do we really compete in the what we would call traditionally on-level courses in 9 through 12. So thankfully, I don't run into those types of battles. I mean, they've been very public. We've seen it around. It's now pretty dated, but one of the other publishing companies in the 90s with terms around slavery and workers and things of that nature. And to me, that goes back to us holding true then to thinking about the style guide and how we're going to approach language in our books. One of them that I'll say I've been thinking about, and this is all continuous, and we'll see where we end up. And again, it's a large team of people that are really thinking through this for us, is the term slaves versus the term enslaved people. So if you were, well, probably grade school, but certainly high school, there's a map of colonial America, and it shows goods going back from colonial America to Europe. Tobacco, sugar. And then there's a line coming forward from Africa that says slaves. If the label on that line says enslaved people, I think it reframes that in a really important way, because you're no longer talking about the commoditizing of a human being, you're actually recognizing the human being as the language.
Yeah.
And so that's like an important and uncomfortable one that I think is reflective of why the words that we're going to use are going to carry a lot of weight, and why it's important for us to try to think through, how our audience is going to be receptive to various types of changes in that way. In terms of like having to make compromises around content, it doesn't happen very often. Few rare occasions with international markets where they'll make a request, but for the most part, it being in higher ed, we can follow the author's vision pretty closely and follow the principles that we're trying to lay out as closely as possible.
Let me ask a question, just kind of going back just a little bit to the diversity in the publishing realm, particularly with the areas that you're in. Is there such thing as trying to recruit? And maybe I missed that in the earlier conversation, but I understand talking about going to the HBCUs and looking at that, but is there such thing as trying to recruit, not necessarily for African-American studies, but maybe around economics, maybe around civics, things of those natures that's outside of the traditional realm of Black authors, I suppose. Is there an effort to do that? Is that something that you all do, or got headhunters? I don't know.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I don't think I'm understanding the question.
So, do y'all recruit authors, for instance, out? In terms of diversity, and outside of the traditional realms of African American studies, do you recruit authors who can do other things, whether it's economics, whether it's language, things of that nature?
Yeah. So I think that's a stronger intent of our group now in thinking about, and diversity is important everywhere. One of the phrases that's been important to us in thinking about it is diversity is a fact, inclusion is a choice. So you actually have to be active on this. So I think about it both in terms of recruiting authors, but then recruiting, content contributors to our digital materials and recruiting key reviewers to help us improve it. So like we have a chapter in a public speaking book. The chapter is about speaking on social change, like speaking to social change. Like these are things that are important in terms of how we think of what students need to see. There was a really good quote in a New York Times article this June, which I'm just going to quickly reference. There was an article in June on being Black in publishing, and it was focused on trade and consumer publishing. So I was reading it, not everything being germane to education publishing, where there tends to be a lot of optimism about where I think we can go. But there's a bookstore in Harlem, Sisters Uptown Bookstore, and Jennifer Wilson's the owner, and she had been quoted in it, "As I opened this store because as a child growing up in Southwest Georgia, I never saw any depictions of anybody that looked like me in the books that we are studying. I grew up feeling invisible," right? Yeah, that's not anything I want to see written about anything we publish, right? So it's an important one that we've kept in mind. I think the corollary to that on what has been missed then, on where we haven't had as many books out with Black-led authors or other people in underrepresented groups in the effort is, what books never were published because they never saw. So, so there's wrestling with that. But I'm also very optimistic. I think, in getting ready to come here today, I had sent a note out to some of our editorial team and asking them, where are we at in coverage of George Floyd? Where are we at in coverage of Breonna Taylor? And Jacob Blake obviously being in from my home state.
Yeah, like are those killings or are those murders?
Right, and are they being covered at all? Right, where they're being covered, or what type of context, right? That you're getting to. So, and I tell you, my heart warmed. The flurry of emails of the work that's being done to make sure that books that are published in our next 2 copyright years are reflecting on that. And it's not just the coverage of the moment in history. It's in social psychology chapters in intro psych books. It's in English rhetorics and readers, and really extends also to the type of readings that we can, especially in English, a lot of those readers are collections of various readings. And being able to have that book be a platform for voices that 20, 30 years ago maybe wouldn't have been expressed is a huge opportunity, and one that deserves a lot of optimism around it. And even to the degree of things like, there's a camp that falls comfortably into the, I support the protests, I don't support the riots. I support the protests, I don't support the public damage, right? And they feel very comfortable in that. And I don't know if that's right or wrong. That's not my point. But we also have, article in one of the titles that I was encouraged to see, which I want to make sure I reference the title correctly, Olga Kazan's, Why People Leave. So you might end up comfortably in the I support protests, I don't support riots camp, but the students that get to read that title are going to hear the other side of that and get to then make a more educated and informed choice. And to me, extending the conversations that way produces a lot of promise.
Well, speaking of opportunities, we are based out of Aurora, Colorado, and we have our own case, which is Elijah McClain. And if you're going to be including George Floyd and Breonna Taylor, the problem, not a problem, but the difference or the nuance I'd like to put in there is there's no excuses to be made for Elijah McClain. So for the most stark, black and white, on or off switch, is this murder or not? I think if I have an opportunity to tell you, I would say, if you're going to talk about George Floyd, please talk about Elijah McClain, because there are questions. There were drugs in George Floyd's system. There was a possible crime that may have been committed when Elijah McClain was just walking down the street, according to the body cam, right? Breonna Taylor, there was a shot that was fired. So people that have a certain motivated reasoning can insert these other narratives in there and say, well, look, George Floyd, he tested positive for COVID when they did the autopsy. George Floyd had X, Y, and Z drug in his system. Elijah McClain was stone cold sober, committing 0 crimes in HD body cam footage. So just as a point of opportunity, please make sure that gets uplifted to the same level, if you could. Whatever you could do.
What I want to shout out for Mr. Linsmeier is happy that he's in that room. He said that he sent out that information and asked questions.
Mm-hmm.
There could have been a time 20, 30 years ago where no one would even ask the question why this would be in a textbook.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's a good point.
So the fact that that there's actually someone saying, okay, this needs to be addressed. What do we do?
As opposed to a chapter about why did they run?
And there's a textbook out there somewhere from like I wouldn't say that far, 1980, with a chapter on why did they run.
Well, Texas just got it shot down a few years ago when they were trying to say, in the world geography book, they snuck it in saying that enslaved people were unpaid migrant workers.
Yes, I do. My father, who is in Texas, he has one of his good friends works for a newspaper, noted that and the comedy of that. So I'm just really glad to hear that that's a discussion that you all are having. For a major publishing house in that aspect, because it's a discussion. Quite frankly, I'm interested to read the chapter on 45 when this ends.
Or the tomes that are going to be written about 45.
And I'm not trying to get to your politics or whatnot, but I'm interested to see how the history books.
He's an anarchist.
Well, look at this. Exactly. One of my good friends, he's a history teacher. In the beginning, he was excited because he's like, we're about to live history. Of course, he hates it now, but I'm interested to see how this gets published, how this gets discussed in the future. So, yeah.
Well, I was thinking about this too when doing some research. I had
I can't slow your suspense. You'll have to read it when it comes out.
Well, I was thinking about I had one of my old political science books, and the big thing in 1990 was like Slobodan Milosevic.
Yeah.
Like that was like we had textbooks on Slobodan. Who here knows who Slobodan Milosevic is, right? And so in 30 years or in 10 years, when somebody opens up one of those textbooks, like how is it going to be memorialized? How is it going to be taught? How is this era going to be taught? And the fact that at least somebody's asking the question of, okay, we can't just ignore. Look out your windows, guys. We can't just ignore this. We can't just whitewash. We can't as textbook authors.
Yeah.
And
is that the predecessor to Yeltsin?
Slobodan, when the Ukraine, was it Belarus? Slobodan Milosevic and another individual that was the ethnic cleansing in the middle of Europe.
The Yugoslavian breakup. Yeah.
Yeah. And so there's a bunch of ethnic cleansing.
Close.
But I mean, think about it. There was literally, in our lifetime, ethnic cleansing in the middle of Europe. Unless you were a political science major, now you probably have no clue that it even existed.
Is there a narrative around ethnic cleansing when it comes to Black Americans? Is there any narrative about it being any type of a possible slow burn of ethnic cleansing?
Oh, not.
I honestly don't know that level of detail in terms of how the authors present that.
Economics.
That's right.
Oh, yeah. We're just gonna hit you with all the history questions.
I apologize for bringing Chuck on to be our Black history expert.
I'm continuously alarmed at how much Carter actually read his books.
Thank you.
I think it's really.
We're all surprised.
We all, not the trap, but the anchor of falling into Black topics are about history. You know, when we think about even the current events and how they're going to be covered in sociology books, psychology books, economics books, communication books. All these things are affected by what happens, and I think sometimes the concentration too much on the portrayal in U.S. history as essential and important and subject to the scrutiny that it deserves needs to look elsewhere too, because it's just as important in all these other areas of our discourse. So, and how those topics are framed and how those topics are motivating students in those areas are keenly important to me. So, when we look at the shifting nature of education, particularly under COVID, with so many schools moving online, we're seeing the reading and the ebook play an essential role, but so much of the other material now plays as important of a role. And one of the things that we're able to do, we have learning science teams, most of the publishers do, and they do, IRB-backed studies. So they get an institutional review board approval to do studies at various institutions, and really looking at, how are underrepresented students, students that are coming in first generation to college, students that don't have the economic support, how are they doing in the programs the same way? And COVID's really, there's a number of articles, and we'll see a lot of studies, I assume, emerge, but I suspect we'll see them showing a greater disparity in learning because of those key differences. So it's the representation in the material, but it's how the tools support the students too. And so our ability to create, a digital experience that helps that student along, keeps them motivated. I talk a bit, it's great if the materials that we produce help them go from a B- to an A-. That's fantastic. I'd really like the materials we create to change the way they think about the course after 2 weeks or 3 weeks, so that they're going to their instructor and saying, this is a gen ed course that I had to take, and I love it, and I'm going to tell you the story from whatever animation or simulation we created, or whatever digital experience we created. So to me, winning on the student engagement, student motivation, how can we help them persist through a course? Like that, it's not just about what they're learning. It goes back to that, how they're learning and how that's going to affect them in terms of motivation to go on in their college career. So when I think of it, and when I say we have an enormous responsibility, it grows every year, because we're playing such a integral role in the time that the instructors have with their students. 15 years ago, I was just talking about a textbook, print textbook.
Well, when you talk about the shift to online because of COVID, it makes me wonder about the level of exposure to misinformation, because online you can find something that represents any thought process, all these other, racist tropes and misinforming tropes, the anti-intellectual viewpoints that you're only learning the liberal view when you go to college, just period, college. Is there any study, or do you guys have to deal with a strategy to try to combat misinformation as they're being exposed to more digital sources?
Yeah, thankfully in that regard, our authors are, fantastic educators who care deeply about what they're doing and sincerely care about science and, rhetorical truth and how to present information that students can build the tools to make evaluations on that type of material that they see. I don't know well, I do, but there's so many programs that we publish right now that have modules on fake news, that have simulations about how to evaluate disparate sources and how to look how data can be used to mislead, and teaching students those skills, is really essential to us being a part of the educational process.
Beautiful. I've seen that in junior highs and high school classes recently.
Well, that was my question, but I wanted Chuck to speak to you guys as, these are members of the school board, one of the most diverse school districts in the country. I know it's the most diverse in the state, one of the most diverse school districts in the country.
Top 10.
Yeah.
What would you want them to tell, they're having seniors, they're having kids who are, about to move on to college, or they're taking these AP classes. Like, what would you want them to tell their students as they're getting ready to go into maybe needing your materials, using your materials?
I think the goals that I expressed very much need to be in mind for them too. So how they're thinking about motivation and engagement. There's a lot of work around, self-regulated learning and how to think about time on task and how you manage your time. It's hard. Most of those students are coming into a very new experience where they're far more independent than they were before. The expectations around the learning are managed independently. And there isn't always the support structure that is there when you're in a K through 12. So finding the things that are motivating, I think, are really key in terms of engaging with the subject matter, and understanding where you can get the support on campus. COVID's made.
What about higher level when you're talking about strategies for how to how would you say, cultivate that curriculum? When we go and talk to the curriculum and instruction teachers and or teachers on special assignment, and we're saying this is how you should go about selecting textbooks. Is there a way to evaluate sources, because you're not really doing K-12? How do they evaluate these sources for K-12 textbooks?
I don't know much, because it varies so much from district to state. So, you have big states like Texas that have a list of books, and then you can use from the list of books. Other districts make a decision at the district level. So I guess I would turn it back to you. What do you find with the students that are, exiting out of the programs in terms of what you're seeing when they come back from college and what they're expressing their needs are?
Yeah, I'm just starting to operate on that level. I'm on the senior math task force, and we're just starting to talk to professors over the next couple of months. We'll be talking to professors to evaluate how good our math courses have been for the last 4 years, because we have the first cohort that have been under this one set of integrated courses. Mm-hmm. So I guess we need that sort of a process for all of these things. Say, hey, once this change has been made, let's see when they matriculate, how well prepared they were, and also talk to the professors as well. You think that would be a good process to go through?
Yeah, and for us, what we then do on the other side of that is, as you get into colleges, we really try to look at those departments that are thinking really creatively about their curriculums. So the ones that are reimagining their approach, that are rethinking and challenging kind of the old norms of the curriculum, and try to understand how that's going to influence learning. It's in our.
What's an example of a creative curriculum?
What's that?
What's an example of a creative curriculum to you?
The biology department, University of Illinois Chicago, or University of Illinois Champaign-Urbana, has had quite a few programs that we've had some work with. One in physics that comes to mind, and also in biology, where there's a biologist, Melissa Michael, who's been on the curriculum team there and really driven undergraduate learning there, and to really understand that move away from disparate sets of facts to conceptual understanding, and really building students into a more coherent set of science principles throughout the biology program. And that's been built and tied into a national program that's been put out over the years in the biology associations. There's also a physics group there. Physics education research is a started up in it's fairly older now, but it has really changed how physics has been taught over the years in just an incredibly hands-on sort of way. We're a publishing company from 30 years ago that's now really focused on digital learning, and we created this thing called IO Lab, which is about the size of 3 Android phones together, and you can do an entire physical lab with it. And when everything went online to COVID, you couldn't be in your physics lab anymore. And suddenly this became the tool that people could learn science at home. So it's been, really remarkable to see the acceleration in those conversations because of COVID. Obviously you're worried about the people in the moment that are not being addressed. But I also think it's producing quite a lot of creative thinking in how pedagogy needs to change and how we can reach students differently.
So we've occupied your time for an hour. I want to say thank you for that. I just wanted to know if there's any last word that you wanted to give or any quick questions that we give, so I know that you can get back to your busy schedule.
Let me just speak on it. I just want to, once again, I want to say thank you. And one of my best friends in the world, we have read and experienced some of the best novels of my life together. Black Like Me, Native Son, Lewis Die, and when Chuck and I were in undergrad, he was obviously the smartest person in the room. So everybody would try to get him to do their work. And I would go to him and I'd be like, why not? Why won't? He's like, well, you can do it yourself. One of the greatest arguments I ever had, or one of the greatest papers I ever wrote, was in his response to him telling me to do my own damn work. I wrote a paper on jazz and how it was being co-opted by certain people. but I'm not going to say it. I'm not going to say it.
Do you play jazz piano, Chuck? Is there anything you want to tell us?
He loved jazz.
No.
He loved jazz. I was like, you know what? You're not going to do this, man. But
My co-opting skills are very limited.
thank you, man. I appreciate this.
Definitely.
This is an eye-opening conversation, and we have to touch back with you and just and delve deeper into some of these things. And
Absolutely.
It may be on the Paperboy show.
I just bring you the news, people.
Seriously, just really appreciate the opportunity to be here and talking to you guys. I really enjoyed the conversations of the shows that I saw, and you guys are doing great work, and obviously connecting that to not only your work on the school board, but to social justice in your community is extremely important. I'll leave with one thing with Michael Carter in our career, and in that last Black Books class, we produced a kind of a capstone project for Dr. in which we looked at traditional white churches and traditional Black churches, which included a video element and a written element. And to really neither of us understanding, Carter's never seen what I wrote.
Nope.
I've never seen what he filmed.
Nope. Got A, boys.
Got A. That's all that matters. You know what? You just look at the audio. Whenever you go to the Black church, the audio level's gonna be up here. You go to the white church, the audio level's gonna be down here.
All right. All right. Thank you so much for really taking the time and just to talk to us. Thanks to Carter, definitely for bringing you here. I think we've met some folks that we just want to circle back with, definitely in the future, because obviously the work that you're doing and the work that we're seeing take place, is something that's going to create more and further discussion. So with that, I just want to say thanks.
Thank you. Happy to join anytime.
All right, and go Black folks.
She loves me not, but it's all good cause I give her all that I got. I can't believe that I'm feeling away. I wanna let go, but these feelings will stay. I know the words, but got nothing to say. Who knew emotions could get in the way? I'm not okay, but I will be though. Wanted you to be my babe, but that ain't how I go. You say you care, but you show me you don't. I can't believe I'm having an emotional flow. but she ain't nothing like I'm used to. This feeling that I'm getting now's too new. I know we both got options, boo, but if I had to make a choice, I would choose you. I wonder, does she even love me? She's on my mind, but is she thinking of me? Trust issues make it hard for her to trust me, and I done fell in love.